It is not unheard of for Hollywood studio executives to interfere in the making of a movie, disapproving of creative choices or methods of its directors. Francis Ford Coppola's movie, The Godfather, was no exception. Once offered to director Sergio Leone, the movie nearly became something other than the iconic mafia film it is today. Instead of the dark mob film we now enjoy, it could have become something of a thrill-kill crime flick, or perhaps a consumer-friendly gangster drama with all the bells and whistles suited for a more mainstream audience. What few people don't realize is that Francis Ford Coppola and Al Pacino were nearly replaced, but both they and the film were saved by one gripping scene. Released over 50 years ago, The Godfather is considered hands down one of the greatest movies ever made by movie critics and audiences alike. But what we see today almost didn't come to pass, and if any group is to blame for the near-fatal decision to turn The Godfather into a more mainstream adrenaline-pumping crime drama, the blame would fall on the usual suspects: big studio executives. Okay, that's a bit tongue-in-cheek. It isn't always their fault, but in this case, it would have been. Studio interference isn't a rare thing in Hollywood, and The Godfather had its fair share. Long before Coppola was given the director's seat, Paramount executives had a string of other directors in mind. The studio's first choice was Sergio Leone. He turned down the offer to direct The Godfather and went on to direct his final movie, which incidentally was ruined because of studio meddling. Paramount executives, led by Robert Evans, wanted The Godfather to thrill audiences. They wanted a movie that would explode with drama and violence. What they also wanted was to infuse it with culture. This was one reason Italian director Leone was at the top of their list to begin with. Unable to get him on board, they also approached director Peter Bogdanovich, despite him not having any Italian heritage. Like many others on this list, the critically acclaimed director turned down the offer. Bogdanovich wasn't interested in making a film about the mafia. Numerous directors whose names are likely less recognizable today were on their list. Elia Kazan, Arthur Penn, Peter Yates, Costa Gavras, Otto Preminger, and Richard Brooks were all considered. Franklin J. Schaffner, who worked with Coppola on Patton, was included on the shortlist as well. Coppola's name finally came up. His fee was reasonably low, and he was of Italian descent. The perfect match. The problem was at the first blush, Coppola turned them down. He thought poorly of Mario Puzo's novel, a fast-rising bestseller at the time, saying it was unsavory and over the top. But later, he changed his mind, realizing he was dealing with financial difficulties with another studio for previous work. Together with the urging from family, Coppola relented and agreed to join the project. Upon delving deeper into Puzo's story, he detected a more profound message beyond organized crime, one that was about traditional family values in the backdrop of a modernizing capitalist America. Things started on the wrong foot for the Paramount Coppola team-up, and problems continued from there. Although Francis Ford Coppola would go on to earn worldwide acclaim as director and screenwriter for The Godfather, he worked under constant threat of losing his directorial job during filming. The studio had installed a stand-in director on set, ready to step in the moment Coppola failed to deliver as promised. One of the promises was to keep the film under 120 minutes. The studio had an issue with the film extending well beyond the preferred maximum length. It reached a whopping 175 minutes, nearly an hour over their agreed limit. Studio executives have been known to brutalize movies, at times without the director's knowledge or consent, trimming them down to what executives feel will be more tolerable or digestible for their audiences. If you were part of the production team, how would you have trimmed down The Godfather to under 2 hours? That's right, you shouldn't. They didn't like Gordon Willis either, who was Coppola's choice for cinematographer. The choice of Willis was such a critical part of the movie that the cinematographer and his work deserve their own tribute. As for the other points of contention between Paramount and Coppola, due to a recent string of movie flops, the studio was apprehensive about going over budget. They wanted a crime flick that was made to sell hot and sell fast, all on a low budget. Well, of course Coppola went over budget, but at the time, no one knew the film would be an award-winning box office hit and worth every penny. Budget wasn't the only thing blown. The studio had their doubts about Coppola's choices for several roles. It was their decision to hold numerous screen tests to find the perfect cast, blowing hundreds of thousands of dollars on coast-to-coast auditions. Their shortlist for the role of Kay included Karen Black, Tuesday Weld, Blythe Danner, and Michelle Phillips, names that are hardly recognizable today. They were apprehensive about Diane Keaton because they viewed her as too eccentric and unconventional. They wanted someone else to play Don Vito Corleone as well. To the executives, Marlon Brando's overblown sense of self-importance was too toxic for their comfort. In his stead, They considered Ernest Borgnine, Carlo Ponti, Charles Bronson, Burt Lancaster, George C. Scott, Anthony Quinn, Richard Conte, and Orson Welles. Take a look at these actors and tell me which one would have portrayed a better Don Corleone. Coppola wanted to choose either Marlon Brando or Laurence Olivier, but Puzo himself couldn't see anyone else playing Vito other than Brando. When the executives finally caved in, it was an embarrassing conditional hire for the veteran actor. All these production decisions were affecting the one thing the studio wanted, to stay on budget, and of course, to produce a hit film. Still, the decision for the most crucial role was also in flux. A long list of actors was considered to play Michael. This included Dustin Hoffman, Ryan O'Neal, Warren Beatty, Jack Nicholson, Martin Sheen, Frank Langella, and even James Caan, who ultimately landed the role for Michael's brother, Sonny. The convolutions of casting involved Robert De Niro as well, who would later join the cast in the second installment of the movie trilogy. But more than anything, the studio favored a familiar face to play the lead. It was a toss-up between Warren Beatty and Robert Redford. The executives found Pacino too short and too much of an unknown in the film industry. Coppola convinced them to stick with Pacino, and thankfully they did. But even after they settled on Pacino, they still attempted to drop him from the cast on 3 occasions. Can you guess why? They thought he wasn't portraying Michael with enough vigor, thinking his performance was rather lackluster. Al Pacino became Michael, of course, and the movie is the classic it is today. Thank goodness. But it was only after studio executives saw one particular restaurant scene. It is a pivotal scene wherein Pacino's character devolves dramatically into darkness. After the viewing of the scene, the studio executives realized Coppola had something there, which made them loosen their vice grip on him from that point on. The restaurant scene saved the entire film. And to fully appreciate how this happened, let's backtrack a bit to how this happened. For Coppola, the pressure was on to get studio bigwigs to greenlight Pacino as Michael and himself as director. He felt that everything rested on the filming of one scene. So, what did he do? He moved up the schedule to shoot it, knowing that this one scene was critical in selling his vision for the movie. Louis' Restaurant in the Bronx was an Italian restaurant where Michael Corleone met with New York Police Chief McCluskey and the Turk, Sollozzo. What is so special about this scene at the restaurant? For that, we turn to Max Winter from No Film School and his critique of the iconic scene. What can we draw from his expertise? Winter explains that there are 4 key elements to the scene that make it so remarkable. These are editing, sound effects, body language, and the use of Italian without subtitles, and finally, music. If the restaurant scene is fresh in your mind, you will recognize all 4 elements brought expertly into play. But if the scene is barely a memory, I urge you to watch The Godfather again and have Winter's key points at hand. It starts with the editing, alternating between long and short takes, building up a rhythm, creating a kind of coldness, the swelling of adrenaline, a panic, and then a burst of violence. The scene is layered with emotion, controlled by the length of each take. In the background, you have the sound element, or in this case, the lack of it. The screeching train and the popping of the cork jump at you within the void, deafening in its silence. The switch to Italian forces you to pay close attention to what is implied, to what must be going on in each one's mind, not to what each one is saying. Sollozzo's complacency is clear. Michael's tension is apparent. And when the music is introduced to the scene, it is a tide that carries all the emotion that permeated the moments leading up to the murders, and makes the violence hit you hard like Innocence Lost.